Bienvenidos a todos, mi linda gente hispanohablante. Leslie Groff, la asistente personal de Jeffrey Epstein durante 18 años, habló con el Congreso y reveló detalles sobre Donald Trump, el presidente de los Estados Unidos. No se pueden perder este video porque ella programaba llamadas frecuentes entre Jeffrey Epstein y Donald Trump. Aparece 167.000 veces en los archivos de Jeffrey Epstein y esto está exponiendo más del oscuro pasado de la administración. Por cierto, oscuro pasado que quieren ocultar. Te voy a explicar todo esto paso y de la forma más clara y sencilla para que entiendas qué dijo realmente y por qué es importante y qué significa para Donald Trump. El oscuro pasado de Donald Trump está saliendo a la superficie, lo que creo que también explica la reciente escalada de esta guerra catastrófica en Irán y vemos una correlación directa ahí. Esto no está recibiendo ni de cerca la atención suficiente, pero la asistente de Jeffrey Epstein, Leslie Groff, testificó, o debería decir, habló con el Comité de Supervisión de la Cámara de Representantes. Los republicanos de MAGA en el Comité de Supervisión de la Cámara de Representantes ya no permiten que los testigos que podrían exponer el oscuro pasado de Donald Trump presten testimonio bajo juramento ante las cámaras de video. Así que lo que hacen son estas entrevistas informales, que es como las están llamando ahora. Y por eso Leslie Groff, quien apareció, como les digo, 167.000 veces en los archivos de Jeffrey Epstein, es la asistente, o fue la asistente de Jeffrey Epstein. Ella es la que organizaba los masajes, las que traía a las niñas. Ella era básicamente la protectora de la agenda de Jeffrey Epstein. Sabe mucho y una de las cosas que ella dijo al Comité de Supervisión de la Cámara es que con bastante regularidad programaba reuniones entre Jeffrey Epstein y Donald Trump y ella programaba todas estas citas. Hay muchos no recuerdo en lo que ella dijo, pero les diré lo que nosotros sí podemos recordar. Sus correos electrónicos, sus comunicaciones, sus mensajes de texto, y creo que ella dio información bastante de sobra y muy importante sobre Donald Trump y Jeffrey Epstein. Ella todavía está encubriendo mucho, pero los demócratas en el Comité de Supervisión de la Cámara de Representantes saben que una vez que los demócratas controlen el Comité de Supervisión de la Cámara, después de las elecciones de medio término, si es que los demócratas toman el control, claro, y cuando lo hagan, van a traer de vuelta a Leslie Groff y van a ponerla bajo juramento. Permítanme compartir con ustedes lo que la congresista demócrata Ansari dijo que estaba pasando cuando interrogaron a Groff, para que puedan escucharlo ustedes mismos. Miren, por favor.
You know, she did as she was told. She really, is saying essentially that she was naive, didn't know better, did not think anything of it. You know, she was calling and booking predominantly in New York is what she says, that she didn't manage most of what happened in Palm Beach or in New Mexico. He also had, 5 or 6 traveling assistants. So that's people like Sarah Kellen, who of course came before us, and she herself was a victim and says she was a victim. But Leslie does not have that same story. She says she was never abused or assaulted by Epstein, that there was nothing romantic or sexual in nature there at all. And yes, she scheduled all of his calls with important high-profile people. She was just, as I left the room, being asked about setting up calls with Donald Trump before their alleged fallout, and she said that she did that about once a quarter before that time period.
And did she know anything about the tenor of their conversations? Did she reveal any of that?
She would reveal nothing about that, said she didn't know. I mean, the number of times the interview will come out as it does in form of a transcript.
Yeah.
You will see the words, I don't recall, I don't know, no, I wasn't aware, many times.
Understood. Congressman, you mentioned that 2008 agreement that Epstein reached with federal prosecutors, obviously controversial in its own right, but it includes a clause that it would not bring any charges against any potential co-conspirators, including Leslie Groff. Did she answer questions about that? Why was her name included in this non-prosecution agreement?
My recollection is that she said she did not know. She, was not aware. And Sarah Kellen said a very similar thing, that she found out about it after the fact. I think there needs to be an independent investigation into this non-prosecution agreement from 2008. I think Alex Acosta, when he came before the committee, made very clear, at least in my view, it was very clear that he was...
Y esto es lo que la congresista demócrata García dijo sobre Groff. Déjenme mostrárselos en este momento. Miren, por favor.
Trying to uncover with Bill Gates and his testimony about Epstein.
Well, look, today we had Ms. Groff, who's actually still testifying right now to the committee. She's giving us, in fact, I think a lot of names of staff, employees, folks that worked in the Epstein orbit. She worked for Epstein for 18 years. So she's being asked, I think, some very tough questions, rightly so, about what she knew, who she scheduled appointments with. She scheduled massages, we know that. And so that's being asked of her right now. We're going to go back as soon as votes are over. But then of Mr. Gates, we've said we don't care if you are a Republican or a Democrat or who you are. The fact that Mr. Gates still had a relationship with Mr. Epstein, even after knowing about the conviction, knowing actually what he had done, I think is very concerning. So we want to know, what did Mr. Gates know? Who else was around that orbit? And why Mr. Gates continued to have a relationship with Mr. Epstein? I think those are important.
Mientras tanto, tienen a James Comer, quien es muy cómplice en el encubrimiento de la red infantil bajo la fachada de solo estoy haciendo una investigación detallada. Se le preguntó, entonces, ¿por qué no trae bajo juramento al fiscal general en funciones Todd Blanche? Dado que él sabe mucha información. Él es el arquitecto del encubrimiento de este tráfico infantil y también claramente de todo esto, según Van Bondi, al menos incluso, y creo que todos sabemos eso. Observen cómo James Comer se retuerce sabiendo que los demócratas se están acercando al asqueroso, oscuro, pervertido y enfermo pasado de Donald Trump. Miren por favor.
Member Garcia said you put in a formal request to have Wiki to have Todd Blanche subpoenaed. Are you going to act on that subpoena? Will Todd Blanche become?
You know, Todd Blanche came to speak to us for a briefing, and the Democrats got up and tiptoed out and ran to the press, clutching their pearls in outrage. What a wasted opportunity. We had Todd Blanche and Pam Bondi in there, and they didn't ask Todd Blanche a single question. But the Republicans stayed, we did our job, and we asked Blanche questions for 2 hours, Blanche and Bondi. So, you know, it's never enough for Garcia. I have a question I think you all should ask Garcia and Walkinshaw and all their members that come out and complain and they're outraged. They complained about Lutnick. They said he said all this stuff. Same thing with Bondi. You all have the transcript. What was their problem? They say stuff to try to create a false narrative. They have an opportunity to ask questions, people, and they refuse because they just pull stunts to try to get on TV. We are doing a substantive investigation. I would argue the most thorough investigation ever of
Quiero traer a la periodista Katie Pang. Ella actualmente tiene una demanda masiva contra Donald Trump y el Departamento de Justicia de Donald Trump respecto a no entregar los archivos de Jeffrey Epstein. Se están realizando sesiones informativas, se están llevando a cabo audiencias de medidas cautelares. Ella sabe más sobre Jeffrey Epstein, ha investigado los archivos de Jeffrey Epstein mejor que casi cualquiera. Así que esto fue lo que tuvo que decir sobre la importancia del testimonio de Leslie Groff. Este es un desglose detallado, van a querer ver cada minuto de esto, por favor. Sé que es largo de ver, pero presten atención, amigos, esto es increíblemente importante. Y si ustedes quieren saber lo que está pasando, vean este video, mírenlo por favor.
Time executive assistant for Jeffrey Epstein will provide information to members of Congress. Her name is Leslie Groff. It's spelled Lesley Groff. This woman's name appears more than 167,000 times in the existing rollout of the Epstein files, as currently illegally and improperly redacted by the Trump Department of Justice. I'm going to say that again. 167,000 times Leslie Groff's name appears in the Epstein files. She worked for Epstein from February of 2001 until July of 2019. I want you to think about the fact that that is 18, 19 years of employment as Jeffrey Epstein's closest executive assistant. I am talking somebody who knew the intimate day in and day out of this man's schedule. They had access to information about this man's life and schedule, travel, etc. Somebody who also had access to directories of contacts, politicians, royalty, Hollywood, political elite, business people, academics, you name it, this woman had access to all this information. And yet, she insists she had no idea what Jeffrey Epstein was doing. She had no idea that he was sexually abusing children. She had no idea that he was running a multi-decade international sex trafficking ring. No idea. She also interacted with Ghislaine Maxwell, let me be clear. And she also claims, Leslie Groff claims, she has no idea about Ghislaine Maxwell being complicit and also a participant in this multi-decade international sex trafficking ring. It defies logic and reality. And yet, ladies and gentlemen, here we are. So I wanted to do a little bit of a deeper dive on Leslie Groff in anticipation of her testimony tomorrow. And I'm going to start with a 2008 interview that was done with the FBI. So let's start there, because I think it's worthwhile to start there. January 9th, 2008. So Leslie Groff has been working for Jeffrey Epstein for approximately 7 years. She was interviewed at her residence in New Canaan, Connecticut, regarding a federal investigation involving the sexual exploitation of minors. She advised that she began working as a personal assistant to Jeffrey Epstein in February of 2001. She was interviewed for the job by Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and Kimberly Foley. Her current job responsibilities include scheduling Epstein's personal and business appointments, answering emails, and organizing planning Epstein's day. Groff described Epstein as a good boss. After the final call she accepted, so during this interview with the FBI, Leslie Groff was attending to her young child, and she also received incoming telephone calls. After the final call was accepted by Groff, she then requested to speak with an attorney, at which point the interview was concluded. The agents then served her with a federal grand jury subpoena. Where did that go? January 9th, 2008. Where did all of that go? Where did that investigation go? And don't you think it's interesting that after receiving some final call from some unknown person or persons, she then requests to speak with an attorney? Almost seems like somebody knew that she was meeting with law enforcement at that time and told her, don't talk to law enforcement anymore. I mean, look, supposition on my part, but as a former prosecutor and somebody who investigated cases, I'd say the timing of that is a little bit suspect. So that is January 9th, 2008. And that is from, if you guys are tracking this, the bait stamp is EFTA 1246201. And then what's interesting is we have the interview note from the FBI, but then we also have this kind of transcribed page, which is separate and apart, which has fewer redactions. Alrighty. So then there's another interview that was done by the FBI of Leslie Groff. And this was July 3rd, 2021. So now we have fast forwarded 13 years, and Jeffrey Epstein is no longer with us on this earth. Remember, he died in the summer of 2019. And inexplicably, in this 302 by the FBI of Leslie Groff, the names of the assistant United States attorneys and the name of the special agent are redacted, which, again, on its face, is a violation of the Epstein Files Transparency Act. But Groff confirms that she worked for Jeffrey Epstein from February of 2001 until July of 2019, and that she worked in this office with several people whose names are going to sound familiar to you. I wrote them down. Eric Gainey, at the time when she started working with Epstein, was Epstein's accountant. Eventually, Gainey stopped working for Epstein. It became Richard Kahn, whose name you have heard a lot lately because he is one of the co-executors of Jeffrey Epstein's estate alongside longtime attorney Darren Endike. Bella Klein was the assistant accountant. So I'm going to stop right there. Eric Gainey and Bella Klein, I just covered their names on Katie Fang News when I was talking about H. Loy Anderson Jr., the late father of Bettina Anderson, who is now known as Bettina Trump, new wife of Don Trump Jr. And remember, I told you that Bettina's father, her late father, was the banker in Palm Beach for Jeffrey Epstein, and Mr. Anderson, the banker, also vouched for Jeffrey Epstein to help him gain entry into the United States Virgin Islands to bring his businesses there and to also facilitate being able to live and to pretty much run his small kingdom of abuse and crime in the Virgin Islands. Harry Beller is another name that comes up a lot in the Epstein orbit. Harry was a financial advisor. Leslie Groff refers to Harry Beller as a traitor because Leslie Groff believed that Jeffrey Epstein was the executive assistant to somebody like Epstein who was a money manager. Darren Indyke and Jeff Shantz were two attorneys that had offices in Jeffrey Epstein's office. Lauren Quitner was the assistant to the attorneys. And Ghislaine Maxwell also had an office right next to Leslie Groff. And Ghislaine Maxwell's assistant's name remains redacted in the files. Now, this is interesting. I want you to listen carefully because, again, this is from Leslie Groff herself in 2021. This is after Jeffrey's dead. And this is how Groff is explaining to the FBI agents what her initial responsibilities were as she started working. And then it kind of stuck with that, but then it kind of escalated, right? Because she became more and more entrenched in Jeffrey Epstein's world. I'm going to run through some of the highlights of this 302. I invite you to take a deeper dive, but I kind of wanted to make sure that you got a picture as depicted by Leslie Groff as to her employment and her working relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. And I want you to note the tone that is going to be markedly different than what I'm going to read to you, which was a puff piece interview with the New York Times in just a minute. Alrighty. So as I said, Leslie Groff she had her own office in the back of Epstein's building on Madison Avenue. But here's the thing. So she said that she had to sign a non-disclosure agreement when she first came to work with Jeffrey Epstein. And she said if she spoke about business people, which included people like Les Wexner, one of Jeffrey Epstein's biggest clients at the time, she would owe Jeffrey Epstein $100,000. She was just overwhelmed with the people that Epstein dealt with in politics, television, etc. She never knew people who had owned a plane prior to working for Jeffrey Epstein. And she said, quote, Epstein and Maxwell's lives were the lifestyle of the rich and famous. So clearly somebody who was wowed by Epstein's orbit. She said a lot of people traveled on Jeffrey Epstein's private plane. Epstein would tell Leslie who to reach out to be able to fly on the plane. And for example, Leslie would also tell the pilot, Larry Visosky, when Jeffrey Epstein wanted to leave. Leslie said the lingo that Jeffrey used was, quote, do you need a ride, end quote. Sometimes Epstein would tell Leslie who was traveling with him. Other times he would tell Larry the pilot himself. Epstein often traveled with Ghislaine Maxwell, but Leslie Groff said Groff did not travel with Jeffrey Epstein when he went on his trips. That's what she claimed. Now, this is interesting as well. Leslie Groff said that Ghislaine Maxwell was a big part of Epstein's life. Maxwell introduced Epstein to a lot of people in her circle. This was Groff's perception because Groff knew her, as in Maxwell's background. Groff's impression, was that she knew that was how Epstein met royalty, through Ghislaine Maxwell. Ghislaine Maxwell did not talk to Leslie Groff. Groff didn't have normal conversations with Maxwell or Epstein. Maxwell told Groff, do not engage in frivolous conversation with Jeffrey Epstein. Now, this is the way that Epstein would have Leslie Groff schedule his massages. According to Leslie Groff, massage was a part of Epstein's day. They were, quote, normal appointments. Groff thought that Ghislaine Maxwell told her that Jeffrey Epstein had to have a massage every day. There are two names that are redacted, And in this 302, it says redacted name and redacted name trained Groff too, but Groff thought Maxwell told her that, as in Epstein had to have a massage every day. It was presented like it was totally normal. Redacted name and redacted name had been there prior to Groff, and no one seemed like it was out of the ordinary. Groff's job was to make appointments. To Groff, making massage appointments was just another appointment she had to make for Epstein. Epstein would call Groff in the morning and say something like, call redacted name and see if she can do a massage at 4. Epstein would then call Groff every 15 minutes. If Groff told Epstein she could not get redacted name, for example, he would tell Groff to call someone else instead. Every 15 minutes, Jeffrey Epstein would call Leslie Groff to have a status update on whether or not his massage had been booked for that day. Don't you think if you're Leslie Groff, something about that would trigger a red flag? Like, it's just not normal. I'm sorry, Leslie. That's just not normal behavior about a massage. And how many people do you know that get a massage every single day? Now, Groff says that there was a directory of contacts. And so if you're looking for a, quote, little black book, you may not find it, right? You'll find a directory of contacts that Groff knew. She would go in and update the list. Everyone had access. It was kept on the computer in an old, antiquated system, according to Leslie Groff. So there are people, contacts available to law enforcement to be able to investigate if they actually wanted and bothered to do so. Groff thought she may have scheduled massages for Epstein's Palm Beach residence, but it was not as much. When Epstein left New York and took an assistant with him, the assistant took over the daily things in Palm Beach, New Mexico, and Paris. Now, Groff doesn't identify her, but I am going to posit that I think that who Groff is talking about here is Sarah Kellen. Because remember, Sarah Kellen was the longtime personal assistant and travel companion for Jeffrey Epstein. Groff thought Maxwell had made a thick, super thick book printed in larger type, kind of like a little black book, but really not little. It was printed and bound. These black books were located everywhere. There was one on Leslie Groff's desk. They were next to Epstein's phones. The books, she didn't know where they were printed. She didn't use the book. She used the directory of people in the computer. But she says there were, quote, a lot of important people in the books with their phone numbers, including politicians, actors, Wall Street individuals, and royalty. Groff was not supposed to take the book home. The book went away eventually, but Groff didn't know when this happened. They changed over to Mac computers. Now, the FBI agents at this time show Leslie Groff a series of different documents, one of which was called, quote, masseuses. Groff said this document looked like something that was definitely going to be in the office that Epstein asked her to put together, as in a list of, quote, masseuses. She said she didn't necessarily think that this particular document shown to her by FBI agents was familiar. She didn't recall making this document, said she was not saying that she never created it, but she did recognize the names. There was another document that FBI agents showed her called, quote, masseuses from Jan, Jan. Leslie says, I think this is what you mean by January. And then the document stated, quote, last saved by Leslie Groff. Groff says, look, this is definitely a list I could have put together and definitely something Epstein would have wanted, but she couldn't recall this specific list. Now, here's the thing. This is how Leslie would go about scheduling the massages. When Leslie would call someone to schedule the massage appointments, she would say something like, hi, redacted name. How are you? Mr. Epstein is in New York and he's wanting to know if you can give a massage at 4. The phone calls were short and to the point. A lot of times when Groff called, the females were at casting calls and they would not know how long they would be there, so they would have to call Groff back. When Epstein would call back for his messages, he would tell Groff to forget that one and call redacted name, as an example. Groff would call someone else and sometimes have to leave a message. She called females and one male masseuse. Scheduling massage appointments was around 1% of Groff's job. Groff left a lot of messages. People would not answer their phones. Sometimes people called Groff asking to see Epstein for a massage. Everyone wanted to see him. Anytime Groff called someone, not just massage people just jumped to meet with Epstein. Again, Groff thought Epstein was a money manager, but clearly was also into the massages. She says Maxwell was an office manager. This is how Groff was introduced to Maxwell. And then, of course, Ghislaine Maxwell trying to downplay her relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. Leslie Groff says otherwise. Maxwell was Epstein's best friend. Epstein and Maxwell were confidants. Groff knew that Epstein built Ghislaine Maxwell her house. Groff thought Epstein and Maxwell were boyfriend and girlfriend. They were very carefree. Groff thought Epstein cared for Maxwell and she cared for him. They did not live together. Sometimes Groff was asked to messenger money for massages, and sometimes JoJo, another longtime employee of Jeffrey Epstein, would take the money for the massages to give to people. Epstein sent everything via messenger and via FedEx. No one ever came to the office to pick up money except JoJo or a messenger. Groff never went to Epstein's house until 2013. She did go to Epstein's island. She also never went to the New Mexico ranch, Zora Ranch. She claims she did not travel with Epstein. When she went to Epstein's island, Epstein was not on the island. Again, more details in this 302, but I want you to remember, this is how it was relayed to the FBI. But compare and contrast to this. In 2005, in February, a New York Times journalist by the name of Landon Thomas Jr., who I have covered extensively here at Katie Fang News, who is a friend, source, close to Jeffrey Epstein. He would pump Epstein for like stock tips, and then he would write all these fluff pieces about Epstein. He would also try to connect Epstein with people, and Epstein hooked him up with people, etc. Landon Thomas Jr., somebody who eventually got let go from the New York Times, understandably so, because how can you be so close to Jeffrey Epstein and then be writing stories about him? So anyway, Landon Thomas Jr. does this ridiculous piece, February 5th, 2005, called "Working for Top Bosses on Wall Street Has Its Perks." Now, I want you to listen to this. Jeffrey Epstein is interviewed as a part of this Landon Thomas Jr. piece. And this is how Landon Thomas Jr. describes Jeffrey Epstein. He says, Jeffrey Epstein pays his 3 executive assistants more than $200,000 a year. A financier who manages the money of a small roster of billionaire clients, Epstein has an unusual philosophy about the utility of his 3-woman executive team, which manages his hectic life of globetrotting and hobnobbing with the likes of former President Clinton. He calls them, as in his executive assistants, including Leslie Groff, a, quote, social prosthesis with an intuitive knowledge of his manifold needs and a 24-hour presence that make them virtually indispensable to his personal and business success. Now, here we go. This is what Jeffrey Epstein said about Leslie Groff and his executive assistants. Quote, and by the way, that includes Sarah Kellen. Quote, "They are an extension of my brain. Their intuition is something that I don't have." Accordingly, Mr. Epstein, who lives and works on a private island in the Virgin Islands but maintains an office in New York, does not stint in compensating them. In addition to the rich payday, he also ladles on the perks. He maintains a charge account at Frederick Fekkai, the society hairdresser, for their unlimited use and pays for all food eaten during his lengthy business hours, including takeout from the Cirque. On trips on his Boeing 727, he frequently takes 2 of the assistants with him. Now, I want to stop for a second. Frederick Fekkai was just a part of a request to Trump DOJ to investigate not only Fekkai, but as well former Miami Beach Mayor Philip Levine. That referral was just done last week, and it was premised on the information that was provided by Sarah Kellen that she had been allegedly sexually assaulted by Fekkai and by Philip Levine. So Fekkai's name's mentioned as far back as 2005. Now, I just said that Epstein told Landon Thomas Jr. that he frequently takes 2 of the assistants with him. When one of them, Leslie Groff, so I don't know, didn't Leslie Groff just say that she didn't travel with Epstein? When one of them, Leslie Groff, who is 38, so in 2005, Leslie was 38 at the time, became pregnant last year and talked of leaving, Epstein bought her a Mercedes-Benz E320 to make her commuting easier and agreed to pay for a full-time nanny so that she could keep working for him. Epstein said of Groff, quote, "There is no way that I could lose Leslie to motherhood." What did Leslie Groff have to say in this article? Groff said she thought she was worth the price. Quote, "It comes down to the bond. I know what he is thinking, and I know when I need to be fast. It's a nice roll we are on." Ooh. So a Leslie Groff, Jeffrey Epstein mind meld is going on here. And yet Leslie Groff wants you to believe that she had no fucking idea what was going on with Jeffrey Epstein. She worked for him from 2001 to 2019 and she had no idea. That's what she wants you to believe. Isn't that interesting? Let's look at the emails that Leslie was on. Kind of makes you wonder. Here's an email dated October 21st, 2011. October 21st, 2011 at 9:54 a.m. Leslie Groff writes to this redacted name. Morning. Jeffrey says he called you at 10:30 last night, but no answer. He's wondering if you might like to stop by today with redacted name at either 3 or 7. Let me know. Thanks, Leslie. Response. Hey, Leslie, we will come today at 7 p.m. Leslie then says, hi, redacted. Jeffrey was asking if you could come now. If not, keep the 7 p.m. To which this person responds, redacted name isn't home now, and I have no way of reaching her either. So Leslie says, okay, no worries. So 7 p.m. it is, thanks. At 3:45, this redacted name person says, hey, Leslie, redacted name just got back. I spoke to her now about tonight. Listen carefully, folks. She has never done anything of this sort before and is a little nervous about the whole thing. I don't know what Jeffrey has planned for tonight, but is it okay if they just meet this time? She would really feel more comfortable that way. If Jeffrey would rather not, it's okay. Let me know. Redacted name. What does Leslie Groff do? She forwards that email to Jeffrey Epstein. She doesn't say, hey, redacted name, what are you talking about? What is she nervous about? What are you talking about? Nope, she just forwards it to Jeffrey Epstein. If you were a woman and you received this email, wouldn't you kind of wonder what the F is going on? This is EFTA 921817. Here's another one. From Leslie Groff to Jeffrey Epstein, May 5th, 2014. Okay? 2014. This is after Jeffrey Epstein's gone to jail, got the sweetheart plea deal, gone to jail, right? This is what she does. Leslie forwards this below message to Jeffrey. It says, below from redacted name, please advise, and the subject is redacted. Hello, redacted name won't be here May 8th, but I can bring another girl. Her name is redacted. If Jeffrey wants to, let me know. Thank you. Bring another girl. Why are we bringing girls? Why are girls that we wanting to bring nervous to be around Jeffrey Epstein? Because they don't know, quote, what he has planned, and she has never done anything of this sort before. That was, the other one was EFTA 1924627. Sounds like somebody who knew, but had blinders on intentionally, right? Like chose not to dig in or chose not to ask questions. Now, Leslie Groff was one of 4 names provided as cannot be prosecuted, cannot be indicted, cannot be prosecuted. Here are 4 co-conspirators, including Leslie Groff. And that was a condition of the non-prosecution agreement that Jeffrey Epstein entered into. If you listen to what her lawyers say, her lawyers claim that she, as in Leslie Groff, had no idea that her name was going to appear in the non-prosecution agreement. Her lawyer claims that after Epstein was arrested in 2008, he continuously lied to Leslie and other members of the staff, insisting that he had been blackmailed and set up. He said the allegations against him were simply false. He had no idea that the, quote, prostitute he had contact with was a minor. In Leslie's mind, that was the reason that he was treated so leniently by law enforcement before and after he was sentenced. And yet, Leslie Groff ends up being sued alongside Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and others. And in her answer to this civil lawsuit brought by Jane Doe 43 in the Southern District of New York in 2018, okay, this is the first thing that she puts on the front page of her answer. This is EFTA 2820428, preliminary statement. Quote, Groff enjoys the same protections of the self-incrimination clause of the Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution, as do all other persons who are potentially subject to criminal prosecution in a jurisdiction in which the Fifth Amendment applies. In other words, she invoked her Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination in this civil lawsuit that was brought in 2017, 2018. Okay. In an FBI interview conducted in 2021, a victim of Jeffrey Epstein, who was under 18 at the time, described how Leslie Groff arranged her appointments with Epstein, which were massages that turned sexual right away. The victim thought it was pretty obvious Leslie knew what was going on, although Leslie never said anything to the girls. She would tell Leslie if a friend couldn't make it and suggest other girls. Groff arranged a payment from Epstein to cover an abortion and payments to cover accommodations when she was staying in hotels. She told Groff she couldn't get an apartment as she was not yet 18. Federal prosecutors ultimately never filed charges against Leslie Groff. And again, tomorrow she shows in front of House Oversight. There's so much more here. I don't have the time to get into it. But I want you to understand that this is just a small sampling of Leslie Groff's involvement in Jeffrey Epstein's life. And I'm not just talking a random, tangentially related employee. I am talking about somebody whose name appears 167,000 times in the Epstein files as currently redacted illegally and improperly. So can you imagine if there aren't the redactions? And can you imagine what is left in the 3 million plus documents that Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche is sitting on right now? But Leslie Groff, if she does not say everything about everyone, just like Sarah Kellen, I have some serious problems. Because Leslie Groff wants you to believe that she just managed this man's daily calendar. And yet, how can you possibly be on emails like that from young girls and not sit there and question what in the actual hell is going on? Was the money worth it to sell your soul to truly a devil like Jeffrey Epstein? And yet now Leslie Groff sits in a home that is now valued at $5 million in New Canaan, Connecticut, and walks her dog and does Pilates. Man, let me tell you. So let's see what comes out of this transcribed interview of Leslie Groff tomorrow. I'm not holding my breath for some huge revelation. Are you? So what do? We keep digging. We keep digging to find out what's behind those redactions. We keep digging to find out who else knew and was involved. I read off a list of names of people that worked in those offices with Jeffrey Epstein that knew Jeffrey Epstein and what was going on, right? Did they all have blinders on? Don't you think they should be thoroughly investigated? Don't you think they should give sworn testimony about what happened? Are we really asking for that much? We're not. Be mad, be outraged, demand accountability. I'm off to rattle some more Epstein Files cages.
Ahí lo tienen, amigos, y con esto me quiero disculpar. Yo sé que fue largo de ver, a muchas personas no les gusta leer los subtítulos, pero insisto que a veces subtítulos es mejor que doblado al español porque pueden ver cómo lo dijo, por qué lo dijo, que nada se alteró y todo lo que está ahí es real. No hay mentiras, no invento nada. Yo lo que hago es explicarte la noticia, pero luego te la muestro para que ustedes vean que sí es verdad. Esto está pasando. La verdad, yo a veces me río. Yo sé que no da risa, pero pareciera que estuviéramos en una novela. Que no fuera la política estadounidense, sino que fuera una novela porque pasan tantas cosas. Pero lastimosamente estas cosas que pasan nos afectan a todos nosotros. Pero bueno, amigos, acabamos de llegar al final del video. Espero de todo corazón que les haya gustado. Si fue así, por favor, déjenmelo saber en los comentarios. Y ya que están ahí, amigos, no olviden dejar su like. Recuerden que si les gusta el contenido de política estadounidense, les va a encantar suscribirse al canal, ya que subimos contenido como este todos los días. Mi nombre es José Alvarado, soy economista y estoy comprometido a informarlos diariamente. Nos vemos en el siguiente video. Adiós.